All right, guys. Well, we're here again, the Accelerating AI podcast. I'm here with Matt, Lionel, and I'm Andy. We're going to be talking on 2 or 3 different topics today about the world of AI and how it's changing right at our fingertips. So, I guess, yeah, in recently, right, we've started to see a bunch of different topics. I think one of the most obvious areas for gamers, right, are we're starting to see some news around Xbox and PlayStation, Nintendo, and the cost has increased to by about 70%. I think the report suggests on building some of this technology, this hardware, and at the same time, we've seen that Xbox is like reducing or culling about 20% of its organization down. Quite interesting dynamic, but yeah, I think it's just like a really interesting time because the cost of hardware is like rising, and I think that kind of connects directly, or how it connects directly, I think, is to the average consumer. Because as a gamer, firstly, 70% rise in hardware or the cost of these units are now, we have to fit the bill as a consumer of a gamer, whether you play Fortnite or your average game. So, just any comments around that, Liner? Where do you what do you see? What are you thinking?
Oh, definitely a good few things to pick out there. It's interestingly enough that the use of AI is pushing the cost of the hardware up. And I think we all know that the constraint is we don't have we've got one really big hardware manufacturer in Taiwan called TSMC that pretty much manufactures everything digital in the world for us. And they just don't have capacity. And so the demand of building all these AI data centers is pushing the price of silicon, of memory, specifically of memory and RAM. And so what's really interesting is that's driving all the consumer prices, right? So your iPhones, your game consoles, your PCs, your laptops, memory recently as a hardware vendor, our memory's gone up X, right? Apps 4X. So, and there's constraints in the channel on where you can get all of this kind of stuff. But it's becoming like an interesting flywheel because you've just mentioned that they're planning to get rid of 20% of their staff, and most of their staff will be development staff. And they're getting rid of that staff because they're leveraging AI, right? And the more they leverage AI, the more the costs are going to go up for the units anyway that they're trying to sell. So it's a bit of a self-perpetuating flywheel at the moment. And I don't think we're going to see much of a change in that until new chip fabs come, right? Until we get the gigafab from Musk a couple of years, and Intel's also building out quite a bit of capacity in the States at the moment with the drive to build to onshore back their chip fab, right? So that's kind of one take that explains some of what's going on. But what do you think, Matthew?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think you're on the money there. I think that in the end we have only so much capacity to produce RAM and GPUs in the world, and that is being rightly prioritized for the development of the massive demand on for AI. And you're totally right. I feel it's a self-perpetuating prophecy at this point, right? The effectively the investment is moving into hardware and away from people, and I think that's quite a scary thing as well. But yeah, for your average consumer, I think this is where we're going to start to see some frustration, really, because I mean, you're talking about consoles that have been out for years, right? These are not brand new consoles, and they're struggling to keep up with demand. Like these are consoles that have been out well established for a long time, and a 71% price hike for something that you would expect to come down in price over years is not something to be to take lightly. And I think iPhone have just announced that their latest phone handset is going to be twice as expensive as the 17 Pro Max, which is already a very expensive handset. So you start to get to the point where, is it worth upgrading? Is it worth getting the latest console? And on a similar vein of gaming, by the way, I'm seeing people building their own games and things like that. And that's a really wild concept as well, isn't it? That you can go and like just create your own game. But I guess, what does this mean then, guys? So if we're saying the hardware is going up and it's going across the board, I mean, it's been going up in commercial and enterprise settings for quite some time now. I know for the last couple of years, in particular, RAM has been sort of skyrocketing in price. Having had to replace RAM in one of my own machines recently, I feel the pain. But it's now knocking onto consumer tech, and it's resulting in your everyday consumer, being faced with just unaffordable increases in the main. But I think, Andy, one of the topics we're going to discuss today is around sort of where does that leave like what we were talking about in the last episode about, setting up your own local LLMs and things like that, because, all of a sudden the cost of entry for that, we talked about it last time being, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds to set up your own effectively LLM in a data center, and the barriers to entry there for most businesses is just too high in terms of capex requirement. And we were looking at alternatives, right? We were looking at, okay, well, you could run, a VPS, for example. And Andy, you actually found some interesting sort of articles around that, and actually the cost comparison the economics don't necessarily work out, right?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing right now is, or hearing and reading, is that the physical hardware, let's say, the average business buys physical H100s, or, this hardware to run AI models, is actually obviously very scarce and very high in demand, because let's face it, the bigger players in the marketplace, the big techs and the AI labs are buying up a lot of this stuff to build their data centers to support the infrastructure layer, not the application layer so much. So there's a gap between like the infrastructure. There's a very different market between when we think about infrastructure and then application layers. And the where businesses, not every business frankly needs to buy physical hardware to just plop it into their office or on site and then launch deploy a model in there. And that's quite an expensive, capital intensive, investment up front that needs to be cleared. The alternative is, if I want a local model and I want to deploy it, you can use one of the providers, the cloud providers. So, the I think Meta is now kind of like pivoting to more infrastructure based. They've got lots of data centers. They've invested a lot in these data center AI based sort of capabilities, so that you and I can use more of our models and access to that. And then there's, of course, the other big technology giants as well, who have data centers, and we can use their cloud environments, whether that's Azure or AWS Bedrock or, GCP and so forth. And so you and I, as business owners, we could effectively use open models, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And we talked about that in the last episode, but you can access and use more privately models, a bit more sort of free models, but the run cost of those across the cloud environments does cost money to run that. And so there's a big debate on, should I, go to OpenAI, or should I go to GCP and just use their regular product, run it on through their API, or do I just like kind of host a GLM 5.2 open source model and deploy it or have a physical hardware to support that. So there's kind of, different ways that people are exploring right now. It's a very, very interesting marketplace, because, Anthropic CEO kind of literally said last week, you know what, open source, it's going to cause lots of problems, started to fearmonger the whole, his whole audience and followers. And of course, you know, there's a business interest there. But, there's also, I think, massive opportunity for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, to have that as a consideration in their back pocket. As to open source, it is, a possible route to, maybe not immediately right now, but, maybe in the next 6 to 12 months, things will start shaping up. But that's my take on it. I mean, Lionel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's so many moving parts, right? So many moving parts. About hosting your own. And I think you're right, hardware costs are through the roof. I think if you're a business seriously considering it, I think you need to think about your duty cycle. And what I mean by that is how much of active time are you going to have on this box? If you can batch work and you can have things happen half an hour while you sleep, fine. You might be able to get somewhere close to the efficiency of a cloud hosted model. But as we said the other day, in the last year, the cheapest models to generate a million tokens was 280 times less. And the frontier model costs to generate 1 million tokens at 10 times less than it was a year ago. So all of these things happening at the same time is really starting to question whether it's even worth locally hosting anything. And I think most companies, you're right, Andy, most companies aren't really all that fussed about token cost, because it is coming down, the cost of that intelligence, but they are concerned about data sovereignty, right? That's really, really important. And as you said, Fabric like Azure's Foundry platform, AWS Bedrock allows you to run those local models from top tier providers inside your own country. And it's all about boundaries, and it's all about borders. And if you can control the flow of traffic and the flow of the processing and keep it within your country, that's absolutely important, right? Starvault recently put up in space the first orbital data embassy, right? So we're talking about sovereignty becoming really, really important. How about we can extend the sovereignty of your country into space? And that's what we're talking about, right? Away from harm. All of these things institutions are starting to think about. It's all becoming really, really important factors. So for me, pick your poison and roll with it. Just keep going with whoever your favorite provider is, and start building and reaping the benefits and forget about self-hosting for now, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it boils down to what's important to you and what's your situation and what's your use case, right? If you're a sporadic chat GPT or Gemini or Claude or whichever frontier model you're using and you're a sporadic user, you ain't gonna get your return on investment from, either leasing a model or definitely setting up your own hardware infrastructure. But if you're a power user, like the type of organization, like a development house where they are, we speaking from bitter experience, you use the latest frontier model, Fable 5, re-released this week in ultra code mode, and you watch your credits burn, and you suddenly realize that there is a use case for power users, and there is just on that alone. I would argue that I'd still probably prefer to have multiple £200 a month subscriptions than have a VPS to look after on our own model, and it still not be quite as good as the latest model, even though admittedly they are all getting better. But that's just around the doing stuff side of it and the limitations there and the costs around that. And a very legitimate concern we're coming up against with clients, because we are using AI to work on clients and sometimes clients data, and that is something that different businesses have different appetites for risk on, and that data can be anything from not very sensitive to PII type, personally identifiable information, and you've got to make, and the person using the AI is the person that ends up being the person making that decision. And that's quite terrifying. So I could understand from a business perspective to say, look, this is a risk to our business. We want our staff utilizing AI, but we don't want the decision about whether they can put that data in or they can't put that data in being made by those employees using the AI. So the safest thing to do is to only give them access to our own model. That's where I see it kind of playing out. And I can certainly see the attraction as a company that does development for clients, for end clients, and the risks around that sort of stuff being something that you want to really manage it and at the organization level, not at the individual level, where it could get slightly more risky.
But just something before we move on to another topic. It's really about optimization. I think we're talking a lot about token cost here, and you mentioned something about burning through tokens when you've got Fable 5 running in ultra mode. Not everything you do, and I think people need to realize this, not everything you do requires Mythos level, Fable level tasks. So simple thing like just thinking about your architecture, leveraging different models. And I'll tell you why this is really, really important. So when you spin up your Claude code and you're working in a session, you've got some options at the bottom that says select Fable or Opus or Sonnet or Haiku. Okay. What people don't realize is that the frontier models are using distillation, which means that all the inference and everything they're putting into the latest model, they're effectively using all of their hardware to do that. All of their hardware goes into the latest model. And once they have a decent latest model, they then distill that model into the lower tier models. So effectively, Opus is distilling of Fable, Sonnet's distilling of Opus, right? And then Haiku is distilling of Sonnet. And so they're using the latest models to train the models below them. And you would have seen recently through the back door, Anthropic said, "Oh, Sonnet 5 is now available." Because it flows down the chain. They're using the latest model to teach the models below it. It's like the lower context, which means that the cost of those lower models drops sharply as you start using them, right? And so if you're building and you're creating product, create an ecosystem. Instead of using your main agent to create, use an ecosystem of agents and then pin those ecosystems of agents to the correct model they should be using. Because as much as Anthropic will say, in the background, if you select Fable 5 Ultra High, we will decide which model's best for you. The reality of it is that they're always choosing the upper tiers of the models. Right? Yeah. And I think if you're creative with the way you build your agentic ecosystems and pin your models to your bot, to your agents, to your LLMs, you can see some huge cost benefits for doing that, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, no, I was going to say there is also something about, and I actually don't use Fable. Most of the time I'm not even using Opus, frankly, for my coding work, because what I'm learning is in our client projects, we're finding firstly you get more tokens, right? You have more headway in terms of burning tokens because they're cheaper, and you can have access to more. But the instances, like you said, Lionel, on architectural decisions, refactoring code, like simplifying the structure that you've built. You might work on something, iterate, but then you want to ask, Opus, or you might want to ask now Fable to look at all the code and say, just check this. And there's efficiencies on the design. Those kind of things are really good from a refactoring standpoint as well. I think other things in the context of like building products, I've learned that because what we're doing is building kind of like internal or external chatbots. Understanding the reasoning model is kind of like first understanding the request and then returning kind of the right response based on the right model. And you can't really do that. I think your point is in the native product for Claude or OpenAI's ChatGPT, you use the most expensive model or adaptive thinking, I think that this, or adaptive changing, whatever it's called, it will always try burn through your tokens. So
Yes.
I think what people and businesses are starting to realize is, yes, we've got this wonderful, powerful tool and we've got this amazing, powerful model, but actually your use case, let's face it, in the day-to-day of work could be, arguably done with a haiku, with a sonnet, or an open.
I mean, absolutely.
What do you guys think?
If you take a coding architecture, if you're building that ecosystem consists of generally between 4 and 5 agents, right? Most people start with a design brief. So you knock up a design brief and you know what you want to build and you've got a solid document, you agree it, you understand it. The first thing you do, you put it through an architect agent. And to me, your architect agent has to operate at Fable 5. Okay. Because it is architecting and building this application based on a brief. You want it to use recursive thinking. You want it to be really, really smart about it. When you take it into planning, to plan the sections it's got to build, you don't need Fable, right? You need maybe an Opus level LLM, right, to be able to do the planning, to create the sections for you, the phases, the planning. And then you're going to put it through to a senior coding engineer, which is Next Agent. And the reality of it, your senior engineer is Sonnet level. Okay, because writing Python code or Next.js or whatever the case might be isn't break the bank intelligence, right? And then the next thing you're going to go to your debugging agent, right? So it's going to write your tests and debug. Now, for writing tests, debugging, and doing adversarial code review, you want to go back to Fable, right? You want to go to that Fable level to say, has this been written properly? Do I need to send it back? Does it need to be rewritten? Can it be optimized? And then the reality of it, the last agent is the document writer. You throw haiku at your document writer because what level of intelligence do you need to write docs? So I think if you build the ecosystem properly and you think about it, I think there's so much of benefit of doing it that way, right? What do you think, Matt?
Well, it's interesting. What you've just described there is the process of building loops, right? And this is what senior software engineers at Anthropic and the likes are doing. This is what they're spending their time doing, is building out agentic loops where the thing feeds back on itself, even down to they have agents that are basically monitoring the equivalent of GitHub repo. In fact, the chap behind OpenClaw, his name escapes me. One of you'll know it straight away. Moved over to OpenAI.
Go.
Steinberg?
Steinberger, yeah.
Steinberg. Peter Steinberg. Peter Steinberg. We got there in the end. So Peter Steinberg, he puts a lot out on X, Twitter, whatever you choose to call it these days. And that's what they're doing. They've literally got agents monitoring Git. And then every time people push PRs, it's assessing them and then basically making a decision as to whether to merge it in or not. It's insane stuff. It's like agents monitoring humans' input, which is, and that input is largely probably generated with AI as well, right? And just one more thing to add on that. I find I've sat here smiling the whole time you guys have been talking because, we do development in house, right? And to even be at a point in time where we're saying a model is too good to do that bit of coding, I think is just insane. I think to get to a point where you're effectively emulating with those different models, the experience and the different levels of being a developer, right? You've got your front end junior software developer through to your midway developer that does a little bit of front end and a little bit of back end through to your senior software full stack developer in the typical terms. And then you've got your solutions engineer and designer at the top, right? And those are your different levels, if that's the easiest way of thinking about it. And then you can combine those models with the level of effort that you think is required from that model. And you've got a really tunable development team, right? That can work through problems the most efficient way. In exactly the same way that when we used to get bugs reported for software we built or websites we built, we'd look at that bug report and we'd make a conscious decision about which member of the team that went to. And that was not no disrespect to them whatsoever, but there's certain things that would go to a junior developer and there's certain things that would absolutely go to a senior software engineer. And that is what we're talking about. If you really boil it down to how to pick a model, it's that level of kind of, right, who would I assign this to if they were a human being? Any other comments to add on
So,
that?
just one more parting things, and I know we're delving deep into development now, but
Mm.
one absolutely blow my mind moment took place last week. Sitting with a friend of mine, he's a senior developer, has been developing all his life, and he's pushing the boundaries of what AI can do, involved in all sorts of really, really interesting things in very niche environments. But I won't tell you who he works for, but he works for a finance company that has an application. And I said to him, how are you using AI right now? He said, man, have a look at this. So he's got an agent that looks at support tickets. So a support ticket was raised by a customer because of a feature that doesn't quite work. And so effectively he turns the system on. This morning he does a review, and then the AI flags up that it picked up this bug from the ticketing system, then goes out, it verifies the bug, it fixes the bug, releases it on a limited release to that customer only. Gets the customer to test. The customer comes back with positive feedback. It then writes the documentation up and then presents it and says, by the way, I fixed this problem end to end. It's been alpha tested. Do you want to beta test or release for production? And that happened autonomously, completely autonomously in the loop. And all he had to do was decide whether he wants more testing or whether he wants to go to production. Not a single line of code was touched. And if you want to understand next level AI coding and software maintenance, man, that's got to be it, right? That's got to absolutely be it. Crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing the product development life cycle and just how that's been changing like over the last 12 months. I listened to some other podcasts, Lenny's podcast. I don't know if you've heard of him. Absolutely fantastic content in there. And just kind of hearing directly from some of these large players in the market about how they're turning products around. And I think we've talked about on this podcast that roadmaps, they are no longer, a 6, 12 months, 18-month roadmap. They are spinning up weekly or monthly, and it's really, really fascinating to see how you can see it in these products like a Claude and a Chat GPT, how fast they're moving, and God knows what their product roadmap looks like. From day 1 to day 30, let alone what it might look like in day 60 and day 90. So it's like really fascinating. I think there's like a lot there for people to learn, and businesses also to learn about when they're thinking about building products. Just starting small and just going, and you've got now this capability, this at your fingertips now to build, innovate, iterate really, really quickly. It's really, really exciting.
So I've said it before. It's faster, easier, cheaper to build the feature than to have a meeting to decide whether you want the feature. You just build it. Right? You don't even need a team now to think about it, which is really interesting because, Matthew, you've been doing some really great work with your team internally, right?
Yeah.
That sounded like a really, really interesting move, the way you guys are pivoting. Tell us more about it.
Well, funnily enough, just today, we always, as a business for a number of years now, we've had quarterly days because we're a very hybrid business and we staff work from home a lot. So we get everybody in the business every quarter just to kind of see the lay of the land. This is where we were. This is where we said we'd be. This is where we are now, and what's next. And typically the format of that is we'll do sort of half an hour to an hour business update. So we did that this morning, and then the agenda is generally open to contributions from the team. On this occasion, and just for some background context, Cube, 70 to 80% of what we do is in 2026 is digital marketing work. So ongoing work for clients. Our blocker and our historic challenge has always been managing development workflows and getting development done in the business, because years back we had, I think, at 1.5 internal developers of varying of that skill set, the mix of skill set. And then on top of that, we had freelancers and outsourced contractors as well that were a supplementary resource. So effectively maybe a 10, 15, 20 person dev house at that point, going back a few years. These days, we're down to 2 developers, really, really experienced full stack developers. We have 2 internal developers. And up until fairly recently, we still had quite a large reliance on outsourced development. So what's happened over the last few months is and that sort of culminates in today, is I've gradually reached the level of confidence where I'm doing entire builds myself without a developer input, right? And what I've learned through that experience is if you have enough understanding and you have enough creativity and a little bit of confidence goes a long way as well. You know, being shown the ropes and how to do things and learning off others, right? You can do in an agency setting anyway, for an SME, you can do a large chunk of the work without being a programmer. So therefore, where you have to ask yourself, what is the role of a programmer in an agency like ours, right? We're not building like the next QuickBooks or the next Facebook, or we're generally building websites, right? And typically WordPress, WooCommerce, that sort of thing for SMEs. So these are not massively complex builds, and a lot of it. I mean, there's tens and tens of, well, millions of WordPress sites out there. So there's a lot of knowledge to draw upon out there on the internet about how to build with WordPress. So it is very good at working with WordPress. So what do we do? Well, I set the challenge for our head of development. I said, right, I want everybody on the team, whether they're a developer or otherwise, I want everybody to be able to have an idea for a client that's in the best interest of that client and get to a point of having a prototype on a staging website that they are happy with. And at that point, I want you to review what they've done, right? And by the way, if you want to make that easier for yourself, build some agents on top of it all to actually do a lot of the review for you and just flag on a scoreboard, how risky this bit of code is you might want to go and have a look at. And that's what we're doing today in our agency. And you're talking about your social media manager being able to build their own social media image generation tool because they can, right? And it's something that's always taken hours off their week, and now they can build their own tool that does it in minutes. And if you empower people that aren't just developers to have an idea and have a go. And my favorite phrase at the moment, you get people come to you and say, well, can it do this? And I'm like, just ask it. Just ask it. What's it going to do? Say no? Okay, fine. Then come and have a chat with me. But I think I saw some sparks of that today. I saw the sparks of inspiration, to have people who walk in that room this morning and then leave having built a plugin, having added a feature to a website that they wanted to add, having fixed that bug that's been sat there for 6 months because we've never found time in the diary to do it. All of a sudden we're back to having, I would say it feels like more developers than we have ever had.
Yeah.
And what's really, really important is these are all people with very different mindsets, very different levels of creativity. They look at these problems from, they don't look at it from the constraints of a developer to go, that's how we do things. They look at it from a different angle and they challenge that thinking. And all of a sudden you get a product at the end or products at the end that actually way better than they would have been just sat in the hands of a developer that or an engineer. They actually could be a lot more creative or could look different or work different. And that's just never been possible before. So it's really exciting. And as like I say, as a business that was basically slowly making our way out of the development space because of this fear of commoditization and, everyone can build a website for themselves these days. And now it's like, okay, right, we can all of a sudden add a layer of really solid expertise over the top of this. And we can do it from a marketer's mindset and actually do the build ourselves and bring it together in a very short space of time. And now our job, I think, is to educate clients on that, to say, have you got an idea? Is there something that maybe 6 months ago you just couldn't get over that problem? And now let's revisit it and let's try and find a solution to it because we can do that today. Are you guys having similar experiences?
Or even if that customer thought, I've got this great idea, but wow, it's going to cost a fortune.
So what we're doing, Lionel, is we're going back through our last 2-3 years worth of quotes, the stuff that we never won, right?
Yeah.
Because, you'd quote for that new website and then they'd just ghost you for the next 6 months. You'd never hear anything back, right? And you know why? It's because it's maybe a little bit more than they budgeted for. And then you look at them and they've still got the same website today that they had 3 years ago. And so I think it's opening up a new opportunity for us to re-engage past prospects to say, look, we can do things differently now. The technology has moved along back fastly. How can we finally help you get to where you want to be? And solutions that just were dismissed because that would take 6 months and 50 grand of development time. So they never even got off the drawing board, let alone to quote stage. We can go revisit those conversations now as well. So
might do that myself.
Do it.
What
Sorry.
I was thinking, sorry, do you want to go, Lionel?
No, go, Andy, go.
What I was thinking about is just this behavior, Tim. It's a cliche now, right? If you don't get on the bandwagon of AI, you're going to fall behind, right? And I think it's a cliche, but it's, this story that you've just shared, Matt, is evidence, that any organization and any kind of role within an organization, if you've got the right leadership, if you've got the right visionary leadership in place that knows the value, you don't have to be super super technical, but the the barrier to entry is pretty low to do, bring up all of your amazing ideas. And also, let's face it, organizations that are in very traditional settings, have been around for years and years doing the same old thing. This is an opportunity for people to just innovate and think outside the box, and it empowers them, like you said, right? It empowers them to build skills and upskill and figure out new ways. And for me, like, innovation is like super important to me, to create new things and think about new ideas. Leaders are always thinking about it, but where you'll see the most impact as an AI powered organization is when you literally empower your organization or your teams and your staff to do these exercises, these workshops. And it starts from the top, it starts from the board, it starts from the C-suite. And then, these really, really honest conversations, right, around in a setting of a workshop, or in the setting of, in a room where you've all got laptops open. That's really where the magic happens. That's what I've
I
seen.
think the visionary side of it is really, really important, but also the governance side of it, and mapping out what the process is. Because speaking to my own staff this morning, there was two main things. One was, I don't know how. Okay, well, we can deal with that. We can train you how. That's not a problem. And the second is a fundamental fear of breaking something or making a mistake and that ending up on the client's website. So effectively what I'm saying is they want to use it, but they're worried about doing harm in the process. And how can we as Cube put in place the right processes and procedures to make sure that that isn't a risk that they need to carry on a personal level? It's the organization that carries that risk. And this is that shift. This is that shift of going, right, you are really experienced developers. Let's use you in the most efficient way by having you as the gatekeepers on Git. And practically, all that means is that everybody in the business has access to staging branches and sandbox websites, but they never have access themselves directly to production. And that means that it has to go through a layer of gatekeeping. These tools exist. For $4 a month, per user, you can set this up on GitHub, and you can put in place those guardrails. So the issue comes is if in an organization like mine, you do not put those processes in place and you give the tools to people and then say nothing, right? You don't set a vision, so they have to work that out for themselves. And different people will move at different paces with that. Some a year down the line probably still wouldn't have touched it. And some will be over in space doing crazy stuff that they really ought not to be doing and launching it, live in production. So if you set out the vision, what we want that to look like in our organization, and then you put the processes, procedures, and guardrails in place to make sure that they can do that safely. That's where I think you get the right balance in the world of development anyway. But I think generally in any organization, you just need to give people the tools, but also the rule book to follow.
Last, go ahead.
Very, very quickly. Just
Yeah.
a few things I want to pick out through the experience you've just been through, because I think they're really, really important things to pick out if you haven't already clocked it. So the first thing is that, you're an SME. I keep saying this, which means that you can pivot really, really quickly, right? You can create value, you can pivot. You don't have to have committees deciding whether you're going to use a tool or what you're going to do. So that, as an SME, you're going to win by bringing AI. The second thing is, there's this fear of job loss, but what you've created, Matthew, is you've created capacity in your organization. That's the key thing. You haven't sacked anyone. You've created demonstrable capacity. You're also fostering creativity in your organization. You're saying to people, you're breaking the mold, and you're saying, you don't have to be a software developer. If you've got a great idea, stage it, right? And then what I really like is the fact that you have HITL, human in the loop gates, right? It's a concept people need to be aware of. You use agents, you use coding agents, you use adversarial agents, and then you use your senior guys to look at that kind of code review and decide whether they want to press the approve button, which build confidence. And this is the thing. You've created that confidence loop. You've said, go and create something, stage it here, and we'll have a look at it. And you can do that, without any fear, without any worry about whether this is going to cause a problem. All we're interested in is in you bringing your creativity to the table and worry about the source code as a secondary function, right?
Yeah.
Which is really great. So there's just by that one move, you've touched on so many pertinent things that I think other SMEs need to hear, right?
Mm.
Because it's right for them. And we keep circling back to the percentage of SMEs that are using AI properly, and it's just not enough, and it's just not fast enough.
Yeah.
So, this is the thing that people need to hear. I think it's such a positive story, Matthew. Really.
Yeah, and I look forward to in the weeks and months to come updating you guys on the good, the bad, and the ugly on that one.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm sure there will be a mix of all three. And we've very much taken the view that look, we've got a process. This is how we're going to try and release it on the team, educate them as best as we possibly can. But I think this technology, more than any other technology that came before it, is just about trying, giving it a go, experimenting, see what works, and learning whilst you're using it. Because I certainly, if I hadn't have been using it to solve some of my own problems as the leader in my business, a SaaS product for this and a dashboard for this, it's doing those things and through doing that you realize the capability of this thing. And actually, when I say have an idea and just do it, it's so different to anything else that's come before it in terms of technology. And it is that incredible. You mentioned it before, Andy, about being pilled, right? It is that sense that you get, particularly after the first few days of experimenting and building things and creating, that almost anything is possible, right? Almost anything is possible. And then you got to look the other way and you got to start going, yeah, okay, but do I really need to build another app for this? Do I really
Exactly.
need to do? So
Yeah, I went through that. I went through that cycle of like staying up late at night, no idea what the time is, building everything,
Yeah.
and anything for my
Anything
business.
you can build, just build
And
it.
yeah, so you have to be mindful for sure of like value, right?
The beauty, but Andy, the beauty part in that is if you enjoy learning, right?
Yes.
If you enjoy doing and learning,
Yeah.
the perfect way to do and learn at the same time. Because I think as much as you allow yourself to be creative, now when you're using an agentic harness like Claude or Codex or whatever the case might be, it's feeding back information to you that's teaching you how to be able to teach you the concept of what's going on, right? And so almost together like a coding teammate, it's building great stuff of your vision, but also imparting an element of education to you that helps reinforce the way you think, right? It's a full-on two-way street. And I think as people become more confident, they start to do much better, greater things because as they're building stuff, they're learning themselves, right?
And I think you sort of described it almost like an AI buddy, right? A programming buddy that everybody has next to them. And we've talked about personal assistants before and everybody having their own effectively PA, right? That can do things. And that's, I think, more akin to things like Claude Cowork, where it can kind of do some of the administrative burden stuff. But actually now everybody's got an extremely capable programmer sat right next to them. And the moment that they have an idea, they can just make it happen. And why is that important? Well, it means that if you're a finance person and you don't know anything about writing code, but you've had this problem that just keeps coming up, or this administrative task that you just keep having to do, or a dashboard that you would love to have, but you haven't got a bloody clue how to do it, you can do it. You can do it, and you can build that app just for yourself. Not everything is about building an app to make £1 million, right? And by selling it for $5 online a month. Sometimes it's just solving those little problems. Like I need to have visibility of, my cash flow forecast is over here, my balance sheet is over here. I want to see the two side by side in a lovely dashboard that gives me some alerts every day. And your average FD can do that. Absolutely no problem. Your social media guy, your designer that's always done things manually can now generate entire website designs using the likes of Claude Design. Your HR person can feel empowered because they can build their own HR portal that works the way they want to work in their organization. All of a sudden, those different perspectives matter so much because everybody in their different departments, in their different job roles, have things that matter to them the most. And you don't generally get that when you embark on a software development build, right? You normally get one or two stakeholders at senior leadership level that they have a vision for what they want, but they forget that Brenda in accounts does a really important job with this system, and Sam over in operations looks at this every day to decide what his priorities are. They miss out on that sort of granular sort of perspective. And that, for me, I think is just insane. Like I have a team of really capable, competent marketing people that can spot marketing problems all day long, right? And spot opportunities all day long. The bottleneck has always been, yeah, but to be honest, it's not even worth me writing the brief for this because I know they won't pay for it, or I know it'll take 2 years to get done or 6 months to get done. And I need this for a campaign in 2 weeks time. So it's pointless, right? That for me is like, that's the carrot dangling here because, I've got all of a sudden a team of people that are really good marketers that know how to get their client where they need them to be, know those clients intimately. And now all of a sudden, any problem is no longer a barrier. It's
Well,
just a challenge.
you've just supercharged your capacity, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And capability, I would argue. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right, guys. Well, we're going to just wrap this up. I will ask you guys one question about. I think we've just talked a lot about dreaming big, right? About the art of the possible for any business owner, any small business owner, or a small size SME based business. That was the good stuff. What are if there's one 60-second response to what are the things that you would be cautious of if you're doing this, what would it be? Matt, let's go with you first.
I think I'll bring it back to what I was saying earlier, governance. Governance at organizational level, this needs to be treated and managed in a very similar way to the rest of your IT infrastructure. And it needs to be looked through the lens of what's the worst thing that an employee could do, whether they intend to or not. What's the worst thing that they could do or things that they could do? And you mitigate against those. As I say, in our example, everybody has to commit to a staging environment that has to be robustly checked, tested by a human in the loop, and it is gated at that point. And that way you can limit the risk and harm. We do not even give them access to the production environment. So there's absolutely no way that they can push code live. And that for me is probably the biggest challenge. And there's the solution as far as I'm concerned. Make sure you put those guardrails in.
I know.
Yeah, play and be as creative as you like, but just be wary of customer data. You've mentioned it before, Matthew. Clients, end user, any PII, GDPR sensitive stuff. It's got to have a proper thing. So if you're embarking on a project that touches that, seek some professional advice. Seek advice somebody who will steer in the right direction of what to do and how to do it. Right. Really important.
Just to add on that, I think the role of organizations in training their staff, even more than they already do, on data protection and GDPR and the significance of it, I think is something that businesses should look to invest in, probably before they invest in AI training, actually. Yes. Let's get the basics around data right.
Do everything else, just be wary of financial and customer data. That's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think for myself, I think there's the data privacy aspect is really, really imperative, right? These models, some of them, if you're using free tools, you should be very careful with the types of data you're using. It's free for a reason. And the reason is typically because they want your data. And so there's
Nothing's ever free.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other aspect is on these paid tools isn't just knowing where your data is getting processed, where does it live, where is it being, how long is it being retained, if it is being retained, and if that if that actually aligns with the policies you have in your organization. But as Lionel said as well, speak to a professional, speak to an expert if you have any questions around that. And but otherwise, the world's your oyster when it comes to these tools, and I'm really excited to see hopefully us to share more about what we're doing in our own organizations and the innovation that's going on individually in our own companies more. With that said, thank you all. This is a really good session, and those that want to subscribe, please do. If you find this useful, like, comment, and would love to just hear back from you all on content, any information, any suggestions on speakers. Thank you all, and speak to you soon, and see you on another one.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.